Traoré exposes French conspiracy. Part 1. The dusty streets of Bamako buzzed with their usual morning chaos. Street vendors called out prices for mangoes and fabric, while motorbikes weaved between donkey carts and aging Toyota trucks. But in Dapatao, a small office tucked behind the central market, Amadou Traoré sat staring at documents that would change everything he thought he knew about his country's gold industry. Amadou had worked as a mining inspector for 12 years. His job was simple: visit the gold mines scattered across Mali, check their operations, and make sure they followed safety rules. It was honest work that paid enough to support his wife Fatoumata and their 3 children. He never expected to stumble upon the biggest fraud in West African mining history. The trouble started 3 weeks earlier when Amadou received an unusual assignment. His supervisor, a nervous man named Boubacar, handed him a folder containing inspection orders for 3 mines in the remote Kays region. What made it strange was the timing. These mines had been inspected just 6 months ago, and everything had been normal. Mining companies usually got inspected once a year, sometimes less. The French partners requested additional checks, Boubacar had explained, avoiding eye contact. They want to make sure everything is running smoothly before they increase their investment. Amadou found this explanation odd. French mining companies had been operating in Mali for decades. They knew the system inside and out. Why would they suddenly need extra inspections? But he took the assignment without questioning it further. A job was a job, and his family needed the travel allowance that came with field inspections. The first mine, Golden Sahara Operations, sat about 400 kilometers northeast of Bamako. Amadou made the journey in his old Land Cruiser, driving through villages where children waved from mud brick houses and goats wandered freely across the dirt roads. The landscape gradually changed from green farming areas to the brown, rocky terrain that held Mali's precious gold deposits. Golden Sahara looked like every other medium-sized mining operation Amadou had seen. Heavy machinery moved tons of earth, while workers in hard hats supervised the digging. The mine's manager, a Frenchman named Philippe Durand, greeted Amadou with a firm handshake and a tour of the facilities. Everything appeared normal during the surface inspection. But when Amadou asked to see the production records, Philippe became uncomfortable. He claimed the books were being updated by their accountant in Bamako and would not be available for another week. This was highly irregular. Mining companies were required by law to keep current production records on site at all times. Amadou made a note in his inspection report but decided to return the following week. The second mine, Desert Gold Enterprises, presented similar problems. The manager, another Frenchman named Marcel Lefebvre, was friendly enough but became evasive when discussing production numbers. He showed Amadou around the mining pit and processing facilities, but when they reached the storage area where refined gold was kept before transport, Marcel quickly guided him away. That area is under renovation, Marcel explained. Safety concerns, you understand. We cannot risk an accident with an inspector present. Amadou had inspected dozens of mines and had never seen a storage facility under renovation while the mine was still operating. Gold storage areas were built to last decades. They rarely needed major repairs. His suspicions grew stronger, but he maintained his professional demeanor and completed the basic inspection. The third mine, Sahel Mining Corporation, proved to be the most revealing. The manager, Jean-Claude Moreau, was clearly anxious from the moment Amadou arrived. He kept checking his phone and looking toward the main road as if expecting someone. When Amadou asked routine questions about worker safety and equipment maintenance, Jean-Claude gave short, distracted answers. The breakthrough came by accident. While inspecting the mine's weighing station, where refined gold was measured before shipment, Amadou noticed something strange. The digital scale showed signs of recent tampering. Scratch marks around the control panel suggested someone had opened it recently. More importantly, the calibration certificate was dated just 3 days ago, which was unusual since these scales were typically calibrated monthly. When Amadou pointed this out, Jean-Claude claimed they had been having technical problems with the scale and needed to recalibrate it more frequently. But Amadou knew these industrial scales well. They were German-made precision instruments that rarely malfunctioned. If there had been recurring problems, the mine would have replaced the scale entirely rather than constantly recalibrating it. That evening, sitting in a small guest house in the nearby town of Kenyeba, Amadou reviewed his notes from all 3 mines. A pattern was emerging. All 3 mines were managed by French nationals. All 3 had shown reluctance to provide production records. All 3 had areas that were supposedly off-limits for safety or renovation reasons. And all 3 had recently recalibrated their gold-weighing equipment. Amadou had worked in Mali's mining sector long enough to know that French companies typically ran tight, efficient operations. They followed procedures strictly and kept meticulous records. The behavior he had observed at these 3 mines was completely out of character for French mining operations. He decided to do something that was not part of his official duties, but felt necessary. Instead of returning directly to Bamako, Amadou drove to the regional mining office in Kays. He wanted to check the official production reports these mines had submitted over the past year. The records clerk, an elderly man named Ibrahim who had worked in the mining office for 25 years, welcomed Amadou warmly. They had worked together on several cases in the past. Ibrahim pulled the files for all 3 mines and spread them across a wooden table in the dusty archive room. What Amadou discovered made his heart race. According to the official report submitted to the government, Golden Sahara operations had produced 2.3 tons of gold in the past 12 months. Desert Gold Enterprises reported 1.8 tons. Sahel Mining Corporation claimed 2.1 tons. These were substantial amounts representing millions of dollars in value. But when Amadou compared these figures to the export records, something did not add up. The 3 mines had collectively reported shipping only 4.2 tons of gold to France for refining and sale. If they had actually produced 6.2 tons as claimed, where had the missing 2 tons gone? Ibrahim noticed Amadou's confused expression and looked over his shoulder at the documents. As an experienced mining clerk, he immediately understood the discrepancy. "This is very strange, my friend," Ibrahim said quietly. "In 25 years, I have never seen such a large difference between production reports and export records. Either these mines are lying about how much gold they produce, or they are sending gold somewhere other than France." Amadou felt a chill despite the warm evening air. Both possibilities suggested serious illegal activity. If the mines were lying about production, they might be avoiding taxes on their actual output. If they were secretly exporting gold to unauthorized destinations, they could be violating international trade agreements and funding illegal activities. As he drove back to Bamako the next morning, Amadou realized he had stumbled onto something, much bigger than routine mining violations. The 3 mines he had inspected were apparently involved in a sophisticated scheme to hide their true gold production. And if French managers were running all 3 operations, there was likely coordination at a much higher level than individual mine sites. The question that troubled Amadou most was why his own supervisor had specifically assigned him to inspect these particular mines. Was it coincidence, or did someone want him to discover what was happening? And if so, why? Traoré exposes French conspiracy. Part 2. Back in Bamako, Amadou could not shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every time he walked to his office at the Ministry of Mines, he noticed the same white Toyota Camry parked across the street. When he stopped for lunch at his usual restaurant, a man in sunglasses sat at a nearby table, pretending to read a newspaper while glancing in his direction. His wife, Fatoumata, noticed his changed behavior immediately. Amadou had always been a calm, steady man who rarely brought work stress home. But now he sat quietly during dinner, barely responding to their children's chatter about school. When she asked what was troubling him, he simply said he was dealing with some complicated paperwork at the office. The truth was that Amadou was trying to figure out his next move. The discrepancies he had discovered at the 3 gold mines suggested a serious crime was taking place. But he also understood the delicate political situation in Mali. The country depended heavily on foreign investment in its mining sector. French companies provided jobs for thousands of Malian workers and generated significant tax revenue for the government. If Amadou was wrong about his suspicions, making accusations against French mining companies could damage his career and harm Mali's relationship with its former colonial power. But if he was right and chose to stay silent, he would be allowing criminals to steal his country's natural resources. 2 days after returning from Kayes, Amadou decided to conduct his own quiet investigation. He began by visiting other mining inspectors in his office to ask casual questions about the 3 companies. What he learned was disturbing. His colleague Sekou mentioned that Golden Sahara Operations had recently requested permission to increase their gold shipment frequency from monthly to weekly. They claimed this was necessary to improve cash flow, but Sekou found it strange since the company had always been financially stable. Another inspector, Mariama, told Amadou that Desert Gold Enterprises had hired a new logistics company to handle their gold transportation. The previous company had worked with them for 8 years without problems. Why change now? Most concerning was information from an inspector named Ousmane, who covered mines in the Sikasso region. He mentioned that several mining company executives had been asking questions about inspection schedules and procedures. They wanted to know which inspectors would be visiting which mines and when. This was highly unusual since companies were normally notified of inspections only a few days in advance. Amadou began to suspect that someone was coordinating activities across multiple mining operations. The pattern suggested a level of organization that went far beyond individual companies trying to cheat on their taxes. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While eating lunch at a restaurant near the Central Market, Amadou overheard a conversation between 2 men at the next table. They were speaking French, which was not unusual in Bamako, but their topic was very specific. One man was complaining about transportation delays affecting the special shipments to Abidjan. The other man assured him that the problem would be resolved within a week and that the colonel was personally handling the situation. Abidjan was the major port city in Côte d'Ivoire, Mali's southern neighbor. It would be a logical place to ship gold if someone wanted to avoid the normal export procedures through Mali's own ports, and the reference to the colonel suggested military involvement in whatever scheme was being discussed. After lunch, Amadou walked through the market, pretending to shop for vegetables while thinking about what he had heard. Mali had experienced political instability in recent years, with military officers playing important roles in the government. If French mining companies were working with corrupt military officials to smuggle gold, it would explain both the coordination he had observed and the unusual interest in inspection schedules. That evening, Amadou made a decision that would change his life forever. He drove to the home of his old university friend, Bakary Coulibaly, who worked as a journalist for one of Bamako's independent newspapers. Bakary had built a reputation for investigating corruption in government and business. More importantly, he was one of the few people Amadou trusted completely. Bakary lived in a modest house in the Hippodrome neighborhood, where middle-class families had small gardens behind concrete walls topped with broken glass. Amadou found his friend sitting on the front porch drinking tea and listening to music on an old radio. "Amadou, my brother," Bakary greeted him warmly. "What brings you to my house so late in the evening?" Instead of exchanging the usual pleasantries, Amadou got straight to the point. "I need to tell you something that could be very dangerous for both of us. But I think the people of Mali deserve to know the truth." Bakary turned off the radio and invited Amadou inside. They sat in the simple living room while Amadou explained everything he had discovered during his mine inspections. He showed Bakary copies of the production reports and export records that revealed the missing 2 tons of gold. Bakari listened carefully, asking occasional questions to clarify details. As an investigative journalist, he immediately understood the implications of what Amadou was describing. "If what you suspect is true," Bakari said slowly, "this is not just about stealing gold. This is about French companies working with corrupt officials to systematically rob Mali of its natural resources. The amounts you are talking about could be worth tens of millions of dollars." They spent the next 3 hours developing a plan to investigate further. Bakary had contacts in the shipping industry who might be able to provide information about unusual gold shipments to Côte d'Ivoire. He also knew customs officials who could check whether the 3 mining companies were accurately reporting their exports. Amadou agreed to provide additional documentation from his official inspections, but they both understood the risks involved. If powerful people were behind this scheme, anyone who threatened to expose them could face serious consequences. The next morning, Amadou arrived at his office to find his supervisor Boubacar waiting for him with an anxious expression. Boubacar closed the door and spoke in a low voice. "Amadou, I need to ask you about your recent inspections in Cays. Have you found any problems with those 3 mines?" "Why do you ask?" Amadou replied carefully. "I received a call yesterday from someone at the French embassy. They wanted to know if there were any concerns about French mining operations in that region. They seemed particularly interested in your inspection reports." This confirmed Amadou's growing suspicions. If the French embassy was monitoring his inspection activities, it suggested that his investigation had already attracted attention at high levels. The question was whether Boubacar was trying to warn him or gather information for someone else. "The inspections are still ongoing," Amadou told his supervisor. "I found some minor procedural issues, but nothing that cannot be corrected with proper documentation." Boubacar seemed relieved by this answer, but Amadou noticed that his supervisor's hands were shaking slightly as he picked up some papers from his desk. Either Boubacar was more nervous about this situation than he was admitting, or he was under pressure from someone to get specific information about Amadou's findings. That afternoon, Amadou received an unexpected phone call at his office. The caller identified himself as Colonel Moussa Diarra and said he worked in the Ministry of Defense on issues related to mining security. "Mr. Traoré, I understand you have been conducting inspections of some mining operations in the Cays region. I would like to meet with you to discuss your findings. There are some security concerns related to those particular mines." The mention of security concerns made Amadou's pulse quicken. This was exactly the kind of military involvement he had begun to suspect. "What type of security concerns?" Amadou asked. "It would be better to discuss this in person." "Can you come to my office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock? I am located in the Defense Ministry building near the Presidential Palace." After hanging up the phone, Amadou sat quietly for several minutes, staring out his office window at the busy street below. The situation was escalating rapidly. First, his supervisor had been contacted by the French embassy. Now, a military officer wanted to meet with him about security issues related to the same mines. Amadou realized he was at a critical decision point. He could attend the meeting with Colonel Diarra and try to learn more about what was happening, but this would put him deeper into a potentially dangerous situation. Alternatively, he could try to back away from the investigation and hope that no one would bother him further. But as he watched the street vendors and ordinary citizens going about their daily business outside his window, Amadou thought about the 2 tons of missing gold. That represented wealth that belonged to the Malian people. If criminal conspirators were stealing it, someone needed to hold them accountable. He picked up his phone and called Bakary. "My friend, I think we need to move faster than we planned. Tomorrow morning, I have a meeting that could either give us the breakthrough we need or put us both in serious danger." That evening, as Amadou helped his youngest daughter with her homework, he wondered if he would still be free to spend quiet evenings with his family in the weeks to come. The investigation he had begun as a routine mining inspector was about to take him into the dangerous world of international conspiracy and political corruption. But there was no turning back now. Too many people already knew that Amadou Traoré had discovered something significant about those 3 gold mines in K's. The only question was whether he could expose the truth before the conspirators found a way to silence him. Traoré exposes French conspiracy. Part 3. The Ministry of Defense building loomed like a fortress in the heart of Bamako. Its thick concrete walls and narrow windows reflected the military's suspicion of the outside world. As Amadou approached, the main gate, armed guards in crisp uniforms, checked his identification twice before allowing him to enter. Colonel Moussa Diarra's office was located on the 3rd floor, down a corridor lined with portraits of Mali's military leaders. The colonel himself was a tall, thin man in his 40s with intelligent eyes and a firm handshake. His desk was notably clean, with only a few carefully arranged documents and a framed photograph of his family. "Mr. Traoré, thank you for coming," the colonel said, gesturing for Amadou to sit in a leather chair across from his desk. "I hope you understand that what we discuss here must remain completely confidential." "I understand, Colonel. But I am curious about these security concerns you mentioned." Colonel Diarra leaned back in his chair and studied Amadou carefully before speaking. "Let me ask you a direct question. During your recent inspections in K's, did you notice anything unusual about the 3 mines you visited?" Amadou chose his words carefully. "I observed some irregularities in their record-keeping procedures. Nothing that appeared to violate safety regulations, but some inconsistencies in their documentation." "What kind of inconsistencies?" This was the moment of truth. Amadou could provide a vague answer and try to extract himself from the situation, or he could be honest and see where it led him. "The production reports submitted to the Ministry of Mines do not match the export records I reviewed in K's. There appears to be a significant discrepancy in the amounts of gold these companies claim to have produced versus what they actually shipped to France." Colonel Diarra nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he already suspected. He opened one of the folders on his desk and removed several photographs, which he spread across the desktop facing Amadou. "These pictures were taken by our intelligence service over the past 6 months. I want you to look at them carefully and tell me if you recognize any of the people." The photographs showed various scenes at what appeared to be mining sites and transportation facilities. In the first image, Amadou immediately recognized Philippe Durand, the manager of Golden Sahara operations, standing next to a military truck loaded with wooden crates. The second photograph showed Marcel Lefebvre from Desert Gold Enterprises shaking hands with a man in military uniform whom Amadou did not recognize. The most shocking image was the third one. It showed Jean-Claude Moreau from Sahel Mining Corporation, standing beside a small aircraft at what looked like a remote airstrip. Next to him was a man Amadou recognized from television news reports, General Ibrahim Kone, who had been involved in Mali's recent political upheavals. "Colonel," Amadou said quietly, "what exactly am I looking at here?" "You are looking at evidence of a criminal conspiracy that involves French mining companies, corrupt military officers, and illegal gold smuggling operations. The 3 mines you inspected are part of a network that has been stealing Mali's gold and selling it through unauthorized channels." Colonel Diarra explained that military intelligence had been monitoring suspicious activities at several mining sites for months. They had discovered that certain French companies were working with corrupt Malian officials to underreport their gold production and secretly transport the excess to buyers in neighboring countries. "The scheme works like this," the colonel continued. "The mines produce much more gold than they report to our government. They pay taxes only on the reported amount. The unreported gold is transported by military vehicles to a private airstrip near the border with Côte d'Ivoire. From there, it is flown to Abidjan and sold to international buyers." "But why are you telling me this?" Amadou asked. Why not simply arrest these people? Colonel Diarra's expression grew serious. Because this conspiracy reaches very high levels of both the Malian government and the French business community. Some of the people involved have powerful political connections. We need solid evidence that will stand up in court, and we need to be sure we can move against all the conspirators simultaneously. The colonel opened another folder and removed documents that made Amadou's heart sink. They were copies of his own inspection reports, including notes he had made about the production discrepancies at the 3 mines. Your inspection reports provided the first official documentation of what we suspected, Colonel Diarra explained. But we need more evidence to build a strong case. That is why I am asking for your help. Amadou felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief that he was apparently on the right side of this investigation, and apprehension about what kind of help the colonel might be requesting. What do you want me to do? We want you to continue your inspections, but with a specific focus on gathering evidence of the gold smuggling operation. We will provide you with special equipment to document what you find, and we will ensure your safety during the investigation. Colonel Diarra opened a briefcase and removed what looked like an ordinary calculator, but was actually a sophisticated recording device. He also provided Amadou with a camera disguised as a pen and a GPS tracking unit that could be hidden in his inspection equipment. Use these tools to document everything you see at the mining sites. Record conversations with the managers. Take photographs of any unusual equipment or storage facilities. Track the movement of gold shipments. But above all, do not let anyone suspect that you are conducting anything other than routine inspections. The colonel also gave Amadou a secure phone number that he could use to report his findings or request emergency assistance. If you ever feel that you are in danger, call this number immediately. We will have people nearby who can help you. As Amadou prepared to leave the meeting, Colonel Diarra provided one final piece of information that shocked him. Mr. Traoré, there is something else you should know. The person who initially assigned you to inspect those 3 specific mines was not your supervisor Boubacar. The assignment came from higher up in the Ministry of Mines, from someone who suspected what was happening and wanted an honest inspector to document it. Who requested my assignment? The Minister of Mines herself, Madame Aminata Touré. She has been concerned about irregularities in the gold mining sector for some time, but she needed evidence before taking action. Your inspection reports have given her the justification she needs to authorize a full investigation. This revelation changed everything for Amadou. He had been worried that his investigation might harm his career or put his family at risk. Now he learned that the highest levels of the mining ministry were backing his work and depending on him to uncover the truth. Driving home from the defense ministry, Amadou felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He was no longer just a mining inspector doing routine checks. He had become a key figure in exposing what could be the largest gold smuggling conspiracy in West African history. That evening, he sat with Bakari at his friend's house, sharing what he had learned from Colonel Diarra while being careful not to reveal the classified details of his new assignment. This is bigger than we imagined, Bakari said after hearing about the military investigation. If French companies are working with corrupt officials to steal Mali's gold, this story could have international implications. We are talking about economic colonialism in the modern era. Bakari had been conducting his own research and had discovered some disturbing information. Several French mining companies operating in Mali were owned by the same parent corporation, a massive conglomerate with ties to former French government officials. If this corporation was systematically cheating Mali out of its gold resources, it represented a continuation of the exploitative relationship that had existed during the colonial period. I have been in contact with some investigative journalists in France, Bakari told Amadou. They are very interested in this story because similar scandals have been suspected in other former French colonies. If we can provide them with solid evidence of what is happening in Mali, they can expose the French side of the conspiracy. Amadou agreed that international attention might be necessary to ensure justice, but he was also concerned about the safety of everyone involved in the investigation. Criminal organizations that could operate across international borders and involve military officials were clearly dangerous. "We need to be very careful about how we proceed," he told Bakari. "The people we are investigating have already shown that they monitor mining inspectors and have contacts in high places. If they discover what we are doing, they might take action to protect themselves." As if to emphasize this point, when Amadou returned home that night, he found his wife Fatoumata waiting for him with a worried expression. "Amadou, a strange thing happened today. A man came to our door asking questions about your work. He claimed to be conducting a survey about mining industry employment, but he asked very specific questions about your recent trips and what you had found during your inspections." "What? Did you tell him?" "I told him I knew nothing about your work and that he should contact your office if he needed official information. But he made me nervous. He seemed to know too much about our family and your job." Amadou realized that the conspirators were already trying to gather information about his activities and possibly intimidate his family. The investigation he had begun as a routine assignment was becoming increasingly dangerous for everyone he cared about. But there was no option to quit. Now, too many people were counting on him to expose the truth, and too much of Mali's wealth was being stolen to allow the conspiracy to continue. Amadou would have to be more careful about protecting his family while gathering the evidence needed to bring the criminals to justice. Traoré exposes French conspiracy. Part 4. The pre-dawn darkness provided perfect cover as Amadou drove toward the Quais region for what would be the most dangerous phase of his investigation. Colonel Diarra had arranged for him to return to the 3 gold mines with upgraded inspection authority and sophisticated surveillance equipment. But this time, Amadou knew he was walking into the heart of a criminal operation that had already noticed his interest. His first stop was Golden Sahara Operations, where Philippe Durand greeted him with noticeably less warmth than during the previous visit. The French manager's eyes were cold as he shook hands, and Amadou could sense tension in the man's body language. "Mr. Traoré, I must say we were surprised to receive notification of another inspection so soon. Is there some specific problem with our operation?" "This is a follow-up inspection to complete some documentation that was incomplete during my last visit," Amadou replied, activating the hidden recording device in his jacket pocket. "I need to review your production records and examine your gold storage facilities." Philippe's jaw tightened. "I am afraid that will not be possible today. We are conducting some sensitive processing operations that cannot be interrupted. Perhaps you could return next week?" This was exactly the kind of obstruction Amadou had expected. Under normal circumstances, mining companies could not refuse access to government inspectors. The fact that Philippe was trying to delay the inspection confirmed that there was something to hide. "Mr. Durand, I am sure you understand that government inspectors have legal authority to examine all facilities during official visits. I am prepared to wait until your sensitive operations are complete, but I cannot leave without completing my inspection." After a tense discussion, Philippe reluctantly agreed to provide access to some areas of the mining operation. But as they walked through the facility, Amadou noticed several things that had changed since his previous visit. The digital weighing scale had been replaced with a different model. The storage area that Philippe had claimed was under renovation was now completely empty, with fresh paint on the walls. Most significantly, Amadou observed that the mining operation was running at a much higher capacity than the production reports suggested. The heavy machinery was processing enormous amounts of earth, and the number of workers suggested round-the-clock operations. But according to the official records, Golden Sahara was only a medium-sized mining operation with modest output. Using the pen camera Colonel Diarra had provided, Amadou photographed the serial numbers on equipment, the processing facilities, and the storage areas. He also managed to record part of a conversation between Philippe and another French employee who mentioned shipping schedules and the special arrangements with our friends in Abidjan. The inspection at Desert Gold Enterprises provided even more disturbing evidence. Marcel Lefebvre was clearly nervous and kept checking his phone throughout Amadou's visit. When Amadou asked to see the company's transportation logs, Marcel claimed they had been damaged in a recent computer malfunction and were being reconstructed from backup files. But while examining the loading area where refined gold was prepared for shipment, Amadou noticed fresh tire tracks from heavy vehicles. The tracks were much larger than those left by the standard trucks used for legitimate gold transportation. They appeared to be from military vehicles, which matched the intelligence Colonel Diarra had shared. More importantly, Amadou discovered what appeared to be a hidden storage facility behind the main processing building. When he asked Marcel about it, the manager claimed it was used for equipment storage and was currently locked because they had misplaced the key. But through a small window, Amadou could see wooden crates stacked inside, similar to those used for gold storage and transportation. The investigation at Sahel Mining Corporation proved to be the most revealing and dangerous. Jean-Claude Moreau was absent when Amadou arrived, and the assistant manager who greeted him seemed to know nothing about normal mining operations. When Amadou asked technical questions about processing procedures and safety protocols, the man gave confused answers that suggested he was not actually a mining professional. While conducting his inspection, Amadou overheard a radio conversation between two workers who were discussing a shipment scheduled for that evening. They mentioned coordinates that sounded like map references and talked about the colonel's people being responsible for transportation. This matched Colonel Diarra's intelligence about military involvement in the smuggling operation. The breakthrough came when Amadou discovered an area of the mining site that was clearly being used for purposes other than gold extraction. Behind a locked gate that he managed to access using his inspector's authority, he found a small airstrip with fuel storage tanks and what appeared to be a communication tower. This was obviously the departure point for the illegal gold shipments Colonel Diarra had described. Using the GPS tracking device, Amadou recorded the exact coordinates of the airstrip and photographed the facilities. But as he was completing this documentation, he heard vehicles approaching rapidly. Through the fence surrounding the airstrip, he could see military trucks arriving with armed soldiers. Realizing he had stumbled into an active smuggling operation, Amadou quickly hid the surveillance equipment and began walking back toward the main mining facility. But before he could reach his vehicle, Jean-Claude Moreau appeared with two men in military uniforms. "Mr. Traoré, I need to ask you some questions about your inspection activities," Moreau said in a voice that was no longer friendly. "My colleagues here are concerned about security in this region." One of the military men stepped forward. "We understand you have been conducting multiple inspections of mining operations in this area. Can you explain the purpose of these repeated visits?" Amadou's heart was racing, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I am conducting routine inspections as assigned by the Ministry of Mines. All of my activities are properly authorized through official channels." "We will need to search your vehicle and inspection equipment," the second military man announced. "There have been reports of unauthorized surveillance activities in this region." This was the moment Amadou had been dreading. If they found the recording equipment and photographs, his investigation would be exposed, and his life would likely be in danger. But as the soldiers began searching his land cruiser, Amadou remembered the emergency phone number Colonel Diarra had provided. Pretending to check the time, he used his phone to send a text message to the emergency number with his GPS coordinates and a simple message: "Need immediate assistance." The search of his vehicle revealed nothing suspicious because Amadou had hidden the surveillance equipment in a secret compartment Colonel Diarra had installed. But the military men were clearly unsatisfied with the results. "Mr. Traoré, we are going to escort you out of this region," Jean-Claude announced. "For security reasons, you should not return here without prior coordination with military authorities." As they prepared to force Amadou to leave, the sound of helicopters approaching from the north interrupted the confrontation. Within minutes, 3 military helicopters landed near the mining facility, and soldiers loyal to Colonel Diarra emerged with weapons ready. The corrupt soldiers who had been detaining Amadou suddenly found themselves outnumbered and surrounded by legitimate military forces. In the confusion that followed, Amadou was able to escape to safety while Colonel Diarra's men secured the mining site and arrested the conspirators. Later that evening, in a secure military facility in Bamako, Amadou reviewed the evidence he had gathered with Colonel Diarra and Minister of Mines Aminata Traoré. The photographs, recordings, and GPS data provided clear proof of the gold smuggling operation and the involvement of corrupt military officials. Mr. Traoré, your courage and dedication have exposed a criminal conspiracy that has been stealing millions of dollars from the people of Mali, Minister Traoré said, as she examined the evidence spread across the conference table. This investigation will have consequences that reach far beyond our borders. Colonel Diarra added more details about what his forces had discovered during the raid on Sahel Mining Corporation. We found over 500 kilograms of refined gold ready for illegal transport. We also arrested General Ibrahim Kone and 6 other military officers who were part of the smuggling network. The evidence you gathered, Mr. Traoré, was crucial in identifying the key players in this conspiracy. But the most shocking revelation came when Colonel Diarra presented documents seized from Jean-Claude Moreau's office. The papers showed that the gold smuggling operation was much larger than anyone had suspected. 7 different mining companies across Mali were involved, and the total amount of stolen gold over the past 2 years exceeded 15 tons, worth more than $500 million. This is not just theft, Minister Traoré said grimly. This is economic warfare against our country. The revenues from this stolen gold should have funded schools, hospitals, and infrastructure projects that could have improved the lives of millions of our citizens. The documents also revealed the French side of the conspiracy. The parent company that owned the 3 mines Amadou had investigated was connected to a network of businesses that operated similar schemes in other African countries. They had been systematically underreporting gold production across multiple nations and using corrupt local officials to facilitate the theft. Amadou felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had uncovered. What had started as routine mine inspections had revealed one of the largest resource theft conspiracies in modern African history. But he also realized that his work was far from over. "Minister, what happens now?" he asked. "How do we ensure that justice is served and that this never happens again?" Minister Traoré explained that the evidence would be used to file criminal charges against all the conspirators, both Malian and French. The government was also preparing to seize the assets of the mining companies involved and demand compensation for the stolen gold. But she warned that the legal process would be complicated because some of the criminals had fled to France, where they would be protected by international laws. "This is why we need to work with international partners and journalists to expose the full scope of this conspiracy," she said. "The people of France and Europe need to understand that their companies are stealing from some of the world's poorest countries." Colonel Diarra had more immediate concerns about Amadou's safety. "Mr. Traoré, even though we have arrested the local conspirators, this criminal network has connections in many countries. You should be prepared for the possibility that some people will want to prevent you from testifying about what you discovered." As if to emphasize this point, Colonel Diarra's phone rang with an urgent message. His intelligence sources reported that several suspicious individuals had been asking questions about Amadou's identity and location in Bamako. The international dimension of the conspiracy meant that Amadou and his family might face threats from criminals operating across borders. "We will provide security for you and your family," Colonel Diarra assured him. "But you should also consider the possibility that you may need to leave Mali temporarily while the legal proceedings take place." This prospect terrified Amadou, more than the physical dangers he had faced during his investigation. Mali was his home, and his family had deep roots in the community. The idea of being forced into exile because he had done his job honestly seemed deeply unfair. But as he drove home that night under military escort, Amadou reflected on the larger significance of what he had accomplished. His investigation had exposed not just a criminal conspiracy, but a system of exploitation that had been robbing African countries of their natural resources for decades. When he arrived home, he found Fatoumata waiting for him with a mixture of relief and anxiety. She had heard radio reports about arrests at mining sites in the Kays region, and she had been worried about his safety. "Amadou, tell me honestly," she said as they sat together in their living room. "Are we in danger because of your work?" He explained as much as he could about the investigation without revealing classified details. He told her about the gold smuggling conspiracy and the arrests that had taken place, but he also had to warn her that their family might face threats from criminals who wanted to prevent him from testifying. "What does this mean for our children?" Fatoumata asked. "Will they be able to continue going to school? Will we be able to stay in our home?" These were the questions that troubled Amadou most. He had never intended for his work to put his family at risk, but he also knew that exposing the truth was necessary for the future of their country. "I don't know what will happen in the coming weeks," he told his wife honestly, "but I do know that what we discovered will help ensure that our children grow up in a country where their natural resources are used to benefit them, not to enrich foreign criminals." The next morning brought news that would change everything again. Bakari called Amadou with information that made the conspiracy even more significant than they had realized. Traoré exposes French conspiracy, Part 6, 6 months after the headlines. Mali mining inspector exposes massive French gold smuggling ring, appeared in newspapers across 3 continents. Amadou Traoré stood before the International Court of Justice in The Hague. The quiet mining inspector from Bamako had become the key witness in one of the largest corporate fraud cases in modern African history. The courtroom was packed with journalists, diplomats, and legal observers from around the world. In the defendant's section sat executives from Compagnie Aurifère Française, the corporation behind the gold smuggling conspiracy. Their expensive suits and confident demeanor could not hide the mounting evidence against them. "Mr. Traoré," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court what you discovered during your inspection of Golden Sahara operations on March 15th. Amadou had testified dozens of times over the past months, but he still felt nervous speaking in such a formal setting. However, his voice was steady as he described the discrepancies in production records and the evidence of systematic underreporting that had first alerted him to the conspiracy. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media, interviews, and international attention. The story that Bakari had helped expose had indeed become global news, sparking investigations in 12 countries and leading to arrests on 3 continents. The immediate aftermath of the investigation had been challenging for Amadou and his family. As Colonel Diarra had predicted, there had been attempts to discredit him and question his motives. Some French media outlets had initially portrayed him as an unreliable witness, motivated by anti-French sentiment rather than genuine concern for justice. But these attacks had backfired when Pierre Dubois, the French mining engineer, publicly confirmed Amadou's findings and provided additional evidence from inside the corporation. Dubois had appeared at a press conference in Paris, flanked by French lawyers and human rights activists, to describe the systematic nature of the company's fraud across Africa. Mr. Traoré discovered what many of us within the company already knew but were afraid to expose, Dubois had told the assembled journalists. This corporation has been stealing from African countries for years, and they used corruption and intimidation to prevent anyone from stopping them. The legal proceedings had moved quickly once the evidence became public. The French government, facing intense pressure from African leaders and European human rights organizations, had frozen the assets of Compagnie Aurifère Française and opened their own criminal investigation. In Mali, the trials of the corrupt military officers had concluded with lengthy prison sentences for General Ibrahim Kona and his conspirators. The military court had also ordered them to pay compensation to the Malian government, though most of their assets had already been seized. More significantly, the African Union had used the evidence from Amadou's investigation to file a formal complaint with the World Trade Organization, demanding new international regulations to prevent resource theft from developing countries. The case had also prompted the United Nations to establish a special commission on corporate accountability in Africa. But the most satisfying development for Amadou had been the impact on ordinary Malians. The recovered gold and seized assets had provided the government with over $200 million in additional revenue. This money was being used to build new schools, hospitals, and rural infrastructure projects across the country. In his home village outside Bamako, Amadou had attended the opening of a new health clinic funded with money recovered from the smuggling conspiracy. Seeing children receive medical care in a facility built with Mali's own resources had reminded him why his investigation had been so important. The international attention had also brought unexpected opportunities. Amadou had been invited to speak at universities and conferences around the world about corporate accountability and resource protection. He had met with government officials in dozens of countries who were implementing new oversight systems to prevent similar conspiracies. The European Union had adopted new regulations requiring mining companies to publish detailed production reports that could be verified by independent auditors. Switzerland had strengthened its banking laws to make it harder for criminals to hide stolen resources in offshore accounts. Perhaps most importantly, several African countries had formed a coalition to share information about mining operations and coordinate their oversight activities. This made it much more difficult for corporations to play countries against each other or exploit weak regulatory systems. But the personal cost of becoming an international whistleblower had been significant. Amadou's family had spent 3 months in protective custody while threats against them were investigated. His children had missed school and struggled to adjust to the constant security presence in their lives. Even now, as he testified in The Hague, Amadou was accompanied by bodyguards provided by the Dutch government. Intelligence agencies had warned that some people connected to the conspiracy remained at large and might still pose a threat to key witnesses. The stress had also affected his marriage. Fatoumata had supported his decision to expose the conspiracy, but she worried constantly about their family's safety and their uncertain future. They had discussed moving to another country permanently, but both felt strongly connected to Mali and wanted their children to grow up understanding their cultural heritage. Mr. Traoré, the defense attorney began his cross-examination, is it not true that you were under financial pressure at the time you made these allegations? Had you not recently applied for a loan that was denied by your bank? This was the line of attack Amadou had expected. The corporation's lawyers were trying to suggest that he had fabricated evidence in hopes of receiving a reward from the government or international organizations. I was conducting routine inspections as assigned by my supervisor, Amadou replied calmly. I had no expectation of financial gain from reporting what I observed. My motivation was to fulfill my professional responsibilities and protect my country's resources. The questioning continued for several hours, but the defense team was unable to shake Amadou's testimony or find contradictions in his account. The evidence he had gathered with Colonel Diarra's surveillance equipment was too detailed and comprehensive to be dismissed as fabrication. When the court session ended that evening, Amadou walked through the streets of The Hague with his security team, reflecting on the long journey that had brought him to this point. A year ago, he had been an unknown civil servant conducting routine mine inspections. Now he was testifying before international judges about crimes that had affected millions of people across Africa. The next morning brought the verdict that advocates for African resource protection had been hoping for. The International Court of Justice ruled that Compagnie Aurifère Française was guilty of systematic fraud and resource theft across multiple African countries. The corporation was ordered to pay $2.8 billion in compensation to the affected governments. More importantly, the court established new legal precedents that made it easier for developing countries to pursue compensation when their resources were illegally extracted by foreign corporations. The ruling also required international financial institutions to implement stronger oversight of transactions involving African natural resources. After the verdict was announced, Amadou was surrounded by journalists from around the world wanting his reaction to the historic ruling. But his thoughts were focused on returning home to Mali and resuming a normal life with his family. "This was never about making myself famous or becoming wealthy," he told the assembled reporters. "This was about ensuring that Mali's resources benefit the Malian people, not foreign criminals. Today's ruling shows that ordinary citizens can hold powerful corporations accountable when they commit crimes." The flight back to Bamako was emotional for Amadou. As the plane descended over the familiar landscape of his homeland, he thought about all the people who had supported his investigation and the positive changes that were already taking place. At the airport, he was greeted by hundreds of supporters, including many of his former colleagues from the Ministry of Mines, students from local universities, and ordinary citizens who wanted to thank him for his courage. Minister Traoré presented him with Mali's highest civilian honor for his service to the country. But the most meaningful moment came when his 3 children ran to embrace him after months of separation due to security concerns. His youngest daughter, who was only 8 years old, looked up at him with pride and said, "Papa, my teacher told us that you are a hero who helped our whole country." As Amadou held his children and looked at the crowd of supporters around him, he realized that his investigation had accomplished something more important than exposing a criminal conspiracy. It had demonstrated that individuals could make a difference against powerful interests, and it had inspired a new generation of Africans to demand transparency and accountability from both their governments and foreign corporations. The gold smuggling ring had been busted. The criminals had been brought to justice, and Mali's resources were now being used to benefit its own people. But perhaps most importantly, Amadou Traoré had shown the world that the era when foreign corporations could freely exploit African countries was coming to an end. His investigation had started with simple questions about missing paperwork at 3 gold mines. It had ended with fundamental changes in how international law protected developing countries from economic exploitation. For a quiet mining inspector from Mali, it had been quite a journey.